All righty, Katie, are you ready? You need a few seconds.
Nope, I'm good.
Okay. Sure?
Yes.
Okay, roll call.
Donahue.
Here.
McKnight.
Here.
Roa.
Here.
Vogel. Here. Stearns.
Here. Pledge of allegiance, if you're able to stand. Please stand. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome you tonight. If you have your cell phone, iPhone, iWatch, if you would mind muting it, I'd appreciate that. I always say I'll try to remind you, and I can always forget, but we'll try it tonight. Do we have anybody signed up for public comment? Mary Ann. Thank you. Ashley, are you on the agenda for discussion?
I'm only here to answer any questions regarding Rainbow Dam.
Okay. You didn't have any prior comments you wanted to make? Okay. And Clint, you're going to be giving us a report, so there you go. Thank you.
Thanks,
Katie, notices of executive session?
Your Honor, an executive session was held on October 6th to discuss real estate, and an executive session was held on October 18th to discuss personnel.
Okay, thank you. Motion to approve the minutes of October 6th regular council meeting?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call?
Donahue.
Aye.
McKnight.
Aye.
Roa.
Aye.
Vogel. Stearns.
Aye. Katie, do we have any communications?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. Managers report, Mary Ann?
Thank you, Your Honor. So we have two presentations tonight. The first one will be an update on the Rainbow Dam. Heather Schmeltz is here from USDA to give an update. So I will turn it over to Heather. Heather, can you hear us? She's present over Zoom.
I can hear you as long as you can hear me.
We
Should
can.
be okay.
Yep, we can.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for allowing me to talk with you tonight. I apologize for not being able to be there in person. Gary will tell you, and Ashley will tell you that we've been talking about trying to do this since June or so. Unfortunately, with NRCS and our federal travel restrictions and things like that with COVID, we ended up basically having to go to the virtual platform, primarily just to make sure we could get this done and give you guys a heads up of everything that's going on and where we've been and what we're working our way through. So even though I can't see you in person, I do, I'm trying to envision the meeting room and hoping that things haven't changed too much. But I was asked to start back at the beginning and just talk about where we've been, what's happening with Rainbow, and why we're looking to rehab it and the process that we've gone through. Both NRCS and the city of Meadville have been interested in rehabilitation of this dam for some time. The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, I believe, was the one who initially spurred the interest when they thought that during one of their annual dam safety inspections, they may have found voids or heard voids under the concrete of the auxiliary spillway. And that raised their concerns with safety of the dam, which then they reported back to you, and we've been in communication from them. So in 2010, we completed an assessment, which is the first step for rehabilitation. And when we're working for rehabilitation through the federal NRCS program, it's a three-phase approach, with the assessment sort of being a preliminary phase. We do the watershed plan, which we had completed in 2019, the watershed plan and environmental evaluation, to basically say, yes, rehab's the best thing to do, the dam's still needed, it doesn't need to be taken out, here's some ballpark costs and a ballpark idea of what we think this rehab's going to look like. And then we go through, and the phase that we're in now is that second phase of that three-pronged approach, is we work through the design of that rehab, flesh it all out, get all the permits that we need, and then at the end of the design phase, we move forward into construction. And of course, each of these phases are requested by the city, so that way There's hard and fast stops, and we can't move forward on the federal side without a request. So we started the planning process in 2014, or at least that's when the city initially requested that we begin it. We completed in 2019, and of course you'll remember Tamarack Dam is a sister dam, or was originally a sister dam to Rainbow in the original watershed project. And that was removed from the project by Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission in 2018 to allow them to move forward with rehabilitation of both Tamarack dams. So that's just a little bit of history and timeline for you. So when we finished that plan, we figured out that the dam had a couple deficiencies. We had a suspicion going in from the beginning that the auxiliary spillway didn't have enough capacity. So what that means is that if we would get the flood of Noah, or I like to joke the flood of Noah, the embankment itself would overtop instead of all the extra flow going around through and over and out through that chute. And the dam was not designed to overtop, and that's a big risk for potential breaching. So to address that, we were looking to make that auxiliary spillway longer from 286 feet to 406 feet to pass that additional flow. When the dam was originally designed, earthquakes and seismic was not a criteria at that time, so we are looking to flatten the back slope of it to a 3-to-1 to address the seismic requirements. We knew that the internal drainage of the dam itself, of the embankment itself, didn't meet current requirements, and when we take that back slope from a 2-to-1 to a 3-to-1 to flatten it, it allows us to put some additional internal drainage in there to make that better. We knew that the principal spillway pipe needed some minor repairs to it, and we're looking to move forward with that. And then we also knew that there had been concerns about the left side of the auxiliary spillway wing walls moving, that they'd rotated and moved and leaned a little bit since construction, and that was a concern as well. And at that point, we were planning on replacing that left retaining wall and repairing the rest of the concrete of the auxiliary spillway as it was needed. So in front of you, you have basically the plan view of what we were looking to do at that point. Let's see if I can remember how to annotate and bring up the cursor so I can point things out, or the pointer. So we were looking to make the auxiliary spillway wider, longer, and increasing that weir length. We were looking to flatten the back slope of the dam and replace the swing wall. And we were in the process, because of flattening the back slope, you were going to lose your impact basin, so that was all being pushed downstream. And then we were going to extend the principal spillway pipe through that new piece of the embankment, as well as relining the rest of it, and some incidental repairs to the riser itself. So from doing that, at the end of the planning study, we were looking at spending about $2.2 million to rehabilitate the dam. And that was going to be cost shared by NRCS at 65. We were going to pay 65% of that, about $1.5 million, and Meadville was going to be responsible for a little over $750,000 to move forward with that rehabilitation. So where are we at now? That's what was completed, or that's where we ended up at the end of the planning study. So, well, remember how I said that planning study was to determine what the best thing was to move forward, if it was rehabilitation or decommissioning, floodproofing downstream. Well, the planning study found that rehabilitation was the cheapest and best alternative to provide the flood protection downstream. So we moved forward with that, and RCS did, and sought and received federal authorization to allow us to move forward into design and construction, if that's the way Meadville wanted to go. So we received those funds, and Meadville requested us move forward with the design. And then we contracted out with DDK Engineering, joint venture, to move forward and complete the design. So they've been under contract since 2020, to move forward and complete the design. So in the meantime, since 2020, last winter and last fall, they completed their site survey. They did structural investigations of the riser and the auxiliary spillway walls. They've also updated the H&H. They did a more in-depth hydrological and hydraulic analysis of Tamarack and Rainbow. One thing that happened since the plan was completed that we knew was coming, but we couldn't quite build into the plan because it wasn't official yet, was that Pennsylvania Department of Dam Safety authorized and completed a state-specific PMP study, probable maximum precipitation study, which is that flood of NOAA that I was originally referring to. And what this did was it changed all the rainfall, the design rainfall rates, and the design rainfall distributions of how fast that rain came down over a set time period. So we had to update all the hydrological data that we had and the analysis that we had for that new study. So because of everything going on with this dam and the complexities of the dam with having Tamarack up above, we sent those analyses out to our National Design Center in Fort Worth for a second set of eyes, because they're going to have to be the ones, they're going to give it a formal review when we get to the end of the design period. Anyhow, we figured we'd send it out to them early, make sure that we were on track with what we were seeing. The other thing that we were coming across was that DDK is under contract with us to design a couple of other dams in Pennsylvania. And when they did that, they said, hey, we know you've had some problems with the internal drainage features of some other dams. Why don't we take a look at this one earlier in the process of what we would normally do, which is normally further down the road during design, and just make sure everything meets. So they did that a little bit preemptively. And the results of their work basically showed that when they did their structural analysis, and this is pretty minor compared to everything else, but that the walls of the auxiliary spillway may be leaning a little bit more than what was originally thought. We're having a tough time categorizing that because of different people doing different measurements, but the theory is that they may be leaning a little bit more. And then the big ticket item, or one of the big ticket items that they came out with, is that the auxiliary spillway chute, the throat of that spillway, does not have enough capacity to pass the maximum flood that we were intending. So if you think of it as a funnel, you can make that lip of the funnel as big as you want, which is basically what we were doing by making that weir longer, but it still can't get through the bottom chute, that little hole in the bottom to get out. And that is basically located, it's located in this area. So we would either have to raise the spillway walls, or we would have to widen the auxiliary spillway about 25 feet, make it 25 feet wider, to be able to get the flow out. The other thing that we found, or the other thing that I should say DDK realized, is that when we had looked at the drainage in the embankment itself during that plan, we never really considered the drainage of the auxiliary spillway. And what is typical and what you usually see is what's on the right-hand side of your screen is a pipe, a perforated pipe, with a double layer of filter material around it. So you'll have your perforated pipe, and you'll have small stones that won't be able to fit. They're too large to fit through the perforations of the pipe, but not, they're too large to fit through the perforations of the pipe, but they'll still let water pass through. And then around that stone, you'll have a sand layer that is fine enough to still let water pass through, but it won't let the soil pass through that it's up against. But it's too big to pass through the perforations in the gravel or in that smaller stone. So that way no material can migrate and move through that filter into the pipe as you have water draining out. And we have that at Rainbow, but it's at very limited locations. most of what we have, or what we believe we have at Rainbow Dam, especially in the auxiliary spillway, is a one-stage filter drain that you see on the on the left-hand side of the screen in front of you. So instead of having that coarse stone around your pipe, we believe that there's fine sand with a little bit of coarse material around the pipe itself. Is that what was contributing to DEP hearing voids? We don't know. And we're not even 100% sure that it's there. But we're pretty sure, based on what we could find in the as-built, the construction specs, and the volumes of material that's been used. But before we get too far down the path, we wanted to let you know what we were finding, so that way, because it has major design implications and associated major cost implications to the project and to things moving forward. So we had two big red flags that we need to address. One is that the auxiliary spillway throat's too small. The dam is going to theoretically overtop if we would get that flood of Noah. And two, that this filter material isn't the right gradation. It's too fine, and we could be losing material through those pipes underneath the auxiliary spillway, which could eventually cause it to crack and fail if it were ever activated. So those are the concerns that we've now realized that we're looking to address moving forward. And to do that, we went back to DDK and said, okay, now what? And they said, well, we can give you a couple of options. So what they did is they presented 3 different options to us. 2 that were the most economical and the most palatable to us will present to you tonight. And what they both basically entail is some kind of roller compacted concrete over top of the embankment or a portion of the embankment. So what this is demonstrating in front of you is one option, our first option, that would be leaving the auxiliary spillway. Both of these options involve leaving the auxiliary spillway in place with just doing the repairs that are needed to it, keeping top of dam the exact same. But in this instance, we're going to cut a secondary auxiliary spillway chute over the top of the dam. So we're going to cut down in this area to what would be the 500-year storm event. So when you would get the 500-year storm event, it would start overtopping. At that point, the water would come down the auxiliary spillway chute and then continue out through the channel. You will already have flow coming over the dam, over the regular spillway at that point as well. So the dam is functioning the same way as it did before, just at the 500-year storm event, it's going to start coming over the chute and head down. And this will allow us, this additional capacity here will allow us to pass that probable maximum precipitation flood event over the dam safely without risk of eroding or creating a head cut back up through the rest of the dam. You'll see in both options that the embankment is still being flattened on that 3-to-1. It's going from a 2-to-1 to a 3-to-1. We're still pushing the impact basin down and doing all the drainage we had talked about before. The trail along the park is still remaining in place. The other thing that's going to happen to address the filtering issue and the pipes and everything below the auxiliary spillway is we're going to come in and we're going to punch holes through the existing auxiliary spillway floor. And it's no small feat for that punching, but go with me on it. We're going to punch holes through the floor, and then we're going to come in and basically put a whole new drainage layer underneath it, or on top of that floor, I should say. So that way any water that gets underneath the floor can come up into that new drainage, have the proper filtration and everything going on there. So we're going to have 3-4 feet, something like that, of drainage material and a new structural floor on top. So basically the floor of the auxiliary spillway is going to raise up a couple feet in elevation. What that does though is that allows the structural floor to be against those auxiliary spillway walls. So we don't need to worry about them leaning. They'll have any kind of extra support that they need. The other thing it does is it allows any water that would end up coming underneath there during activation to have a safe way out of that auxiliary spillway or underneath that drainage without causing any kind of pressure and potentially cracking the floor of the auxiliary spillway and seeing it fail in that way. So those are the key things that we're looking at for the roller compacted concrete going across half of Rainbow Dam. The estimated price with contingencies, because we're at the very beginning stages of trying to flesh these out, would be somewhere, total construction cost now, is somewhere between $5.5 million and $7.2 million. And this is just an example of what that could look like. This was an RCS dam in Virginia that had an RCC auxiliary spillway itself, not a secondary one, but an RCC auxiliary spillway constructed. And if you look at the picture on the right, you can almost imagine that this side here would be right up against Rainbow Dam's auxiliary spillway chute. And then if you look at the picture on the right wall as you're facing it could be leaned back on an angle to make it crossable, mowable, whatever would need to be done. So you can almost picture what this would look like out at the dam. Now the RCC could be left exposed as it is, or it could be covered with topsoil and seeded. We've done both options across the country. We've seen both options, and we're currently under design for both different options for other dams in Pennsylvania. So either one are possible options to try and keep it looking as natural as possible. But you would still have this wall on the side, because this is basically the wall for your existing auxiliary spillway. So that was the first alternative that we were given. The second alternative that we were given to discuss is RCC, roller compacted concrete, over the entire main part of the Rainbow Spillway Dam, or what we consider the dam. Now, if you'll remember, there is a dike that goes along the southern side and back around the high school. We're not planning on changing any elevations there or changing any of that. We would just be dropping the elevation of the top of this main dam as we know it down. So basically it minimizes activation. It's as low as it needs to be. That opening is only as big as it needs to be to pass the PMF, pass that probable maximum flood event. Right now it's set so that we're minimizing the activation, and we know that it's over the 1,000-year storm event. So you would have to receive over the 1,000-year storm event for it to activate. The previous option I showed you over just half the dam was the 500-year storm event. We would still do the same thing to decommission the existing auxiliary spillway. We punch holes in the bottom, we do drainage on top, do that structural concrete floor to hold those walls out. Either way, we're still replacing this retaining wall, the retaining wall of the auxiliary spillway. And this option is just it looks a little bit more uniform, and it gives you better flood protection because of the lesser frequency of activation. It does, though, have a higher price tag. This one is you're looking at about, or we, I should say, are looking at about $6.6 million to $8.6 million in construction costs. Please know that with either alternative, there is no proposed change in the current level of flood prevention or change in upstream or downstream flood elevations. So the 100-year storm, which is normally what everything is designed to, you will see no change. There's no more additional flooding upstream or downstream because of these. These are all for the higher level storm events. Like I said, the first option is starting at the 500-year flood event, and this one is at least 1,000-year flood event. And I do have a picture. This is an example of an RCC embankment that was constructed over a dam, and an RCS dam in Georgia. And if you can imagine, this side, which facing the screen on your left, would be where Rainbow's existing auxiliary spillway would come through. And all these examples that I'm showing you, And the drawings that I've provided for you do not show topsoil over the RCC, and that's just more to bring that out and clarify that we are doing a structural concrete underneath it, but they all could be covered in RCC if the city prefers. So I know costs are important. They're kind of the elephant in the room. So let's talk about what the options are and who would be responsible for what. As these costs are doubling or tripling in some cases, remember that NRCS is still providing that 65%, so our costs are also increasing, as well as asking you to consider your costs increasing as well. The original alternative, when we left the planning study, like I said before, was 2.23 million, with NRCS paying about 1.5 and Meadville paying 780,000. The partial RCC across the embankment is now looking at a total cost of 5.5 million to 7.2 million. Like I said, we built in those contingencies just because we're at the very beginning of it, which would leave Meadville with a cost of 1.9 million to 2.5 million roughly. And of course, and NRCS would also be responsible then for 3.6 million or 4.7 million for actual construction. If it was decided to upgrade it to minimize that activation, we'd be looking at a total cost of 6.6 million to 8.6 million, of which Meadville would be responsible for 2.3 to $3 million of construction costs, and NRCS would pay 4.3 to 5.6 million of construction costs. Just to bring this back home, we know this is a big change. It's a big change for us too. We already paid for the assessment and the planning study, and we're paying 100% of the design. We understand that as construction costs go up, it's generally expected that quality assurance and construction inspection and things like that will also go up as well, which NRCS is responsible for. So we don't take this lightly, but we're looking at moving forward with this if that's the way the city would like to go as a responsible thing to do. So the other thing that I didn't mention now, but I should, and I have mentioned before, is that the city is responsible for easements and permit fees that are needed. The permit fees will be needed before the end of the design. They're normally pretty minimal because of the waivers for the municipalities. So that's the only thing that the city would be out at this point moving forward. So the costs did go up. Let's talk a little bit about why they went up so much. The biggest thing, one of the reasons they went up is that when we went through the plan, we used lower unit costs than what we're seeing now. Is that COVID? Is that supply? Is it just generally lower? So that's one thing that has caused the cost to go up. And we've seen that as well on our other design projects that are currently under design. The biggest problem, or the biggest cost driver though that we're seeing is number 2, is the mitigation of the lack of auxiliary spillway capacity. And we're also seeing that mitigation of the internal drainage system as a significant cost factor. The internal drainage system of the auxiliary spillway raised costs about 2.3 million. So the roller compacted concrete did raise things a lot, but not quite as much as that. The other thing that we're seeing is that, or was not taken into consideration during the plan, was that we're anticipating higher construction costs due to the fact that there's such a small, tight, confined space that doesn't have a lot of room at Rainbow and in Shady Brook Park. for the contractor to move around to stage materials. And even right now, we're looking at currently using areas within the flood pool, which is a little risky, but it's the best we have. So just keep those in mind, that those are some of the reasons that the costs have gone up. And the other thing is, as costs, if they continue to go up, which we're hoping they're not, but we're hoping that this is the end of it. But any changes in costs, the USDA proportion of those also increases or decreases up to that, to keep that 65% of construction costs. So I just threw a whole lot of information at you, and I want to give you some next steps as you digest that information. And what we're looking at as next steps is that we need the city to decide on a preferred alternative design. Are we looking at entirely roller compacted concreting Rainbow Dam as we know it, or just a portion of it, so we know how to move forward with a design? The next steps, or part of what's driving that, is for our contractor to come out and do some more geotechnical investigations, which will include hopefully getting some samples of that material that we think is too fine to be around the pipes, as well as finding some of those pipes to make sure we know exactly what we're dealing with. But we don't want to turn them out there to do that geotech investigation until we know which way we're going with it. So if they need to do some drilling on that left side of the embankment, they can, if we're RCCing the whole thing or not. Once the preliminary design is selected to move forward, it's basically a paperwork exchange between the city and NRCS to update our watershed agreement. And then at that point, once we move forward and finalize the design, we would then submit it for permitting, or the city of Meadville would submit it for permitting, and NRCS and Meadville would solicit construction funds. Once the design is complete and approved and construction funds are in place by everyone, NRCS and Meadville would enter into an agreement saying that yes, we're moving forward with construction. Meadville would give NRCS their portion of the construction funds, and we would move forward with federal contracting to move forward with construction for it. So those are the next steps. The biggest thing that we're looking for, and we're certainly not looking for it tonight, as like I said, I just gave you a whole lot of information. I'm sure there's discussions and questions. But we're looking for your guidance as to which way to move forward. We can see benefits. Normally we'd be looking forward looking to move forward with cheapest cost. However, we do think that there are substantial benefits to the more expensive option, such as appearances and aesthetics and uniformity, and we also like the additional flood protection that it provides that's not quite realized by just setting that next stage at the 500-year level. So that's what I had for you tonight to update you, and I would be happy to take any questions that you may have about any of the material that I've presented. I believe that a handout was included in your packets that briefly go over and show the different alternatives that I discussed, some of the key features and some of those key costs, just to keep it fresh for you as you're moving forward with some of these discussions.
I have 3 questions for you. If memory serves me, the original alternative, we were responsible for the $780,000 and change, but that was basically a conduit. The money was being provided from someone else, and it was not costing our local taxpayers local tax dollars. Would that be true of option 1 or option 2?
So as part of that original alternative, at that point, Gary and Andy Walker at the time had reached out to DEP and their federal watershed program, or their federal flood protection program, and enrolled the city in that to provide the city's 35% at that time. And you're still enrolled, and I believe those numbers just need to be updated for that ask. Challenge, I shouldn't say a challenge, but with that program, the funding needs to be enacted into state legislation. They're expecting that the next enactment might be, so you're hearing me talk about state, which I'm not qualified to talk about, and when state's going to enact things. But from what I've been told from the program manager, is that they're expecting that to happen in either 2022 or 2024. So at that point, that money would be allocated. If it is enacted at that point, it would be allocated to me on Meadville's behalf for the project.
But right now, we'd be taking a chance if we approved option 1 or option 2. We're assuming liability, which may or may not be reimbursed for this. Am I missing something?
Heather, I got this. We're not actually assuming anything right now. We may approve the design, but before actually going forward with construction, it would take an affirmative action of council to move forward with construction. Really, what's before you tonight, and not for decision tonight, this should at a future meeting, really has to do with how are we going to design it, not we're going to build it.
Right.
Heather, correct me if I'm wrong. Is that correct, Andrew?
Yes, and progressing with the design through either alternative does not commit the city to follow through with construction. Right?
Correct.
The life expectancy of these improvements, is that about 50 years?
We're looking more, I think it's 100 years for this project.
Okay. Now, maybe someone can explain the hydraulics to me. If we only have option 1, we have a narrower one, is it theoretically possible that the top of the dam could be breached and water could flow down underneath and eat away the support?
This is Ashley, Heather. The two options that are provided provide a different level of protection. So the first option has half of the dam protected and an auxiliary spillway with the roller compacted concrete. That provides you protection against the 500-year 24-hour storm event. If you select option 2, it provides you with protection at least a minimum of a 1,000-year storm event. So it's a higher, so at the 1,000-year event, option 1 would have the potential to crest higher levels. So I also thought it was important to point out, and the reason we discussed these two levels was the level of protection that's provided through both options, even option 1 at the 500-year 24-hour storm event, is an event that has not occurred since the construction of Rainbow Dam. So it's a significant storm event, even in option 1. But the option 2, at an additional $1.1 to $1.4 million, does provide protection against higher risk levels.
Thank you.
So actually,
Can I jump back in and piggyback off Ashley, if you don't mind?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you see my picture? You see me talking?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, that chute at the top of the dam, or how the dam is cut in, the existing area that's needed to pass that flood of Noah that I keep talking about, in this case, it's about almost 20 inches over the 24-hour storm event, is the same size relatively. It's just a matter of, is it bigger and deeper, which is the halfway, or is it longer and thinner going across the top? So are you cutting down deeper into the dam for that halfway version, or are you just cutting down a little bit into the dam for the whole overtopping of the embankment?
And that's why they're able to design that and not back up any additional water over what will currently back up behind the dam. So the pool at those maximum events would be no greater than what they would be at with the current dam.
So actually, I may have, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, for the first option, that halfway, let me go back to it. if I don't make you dizzy going through the presentation. So for this option right in here, this is basically 5.5 feet deep. And then for this option, it's 2.7 feet deep. So you're cutting the top of the dam basically down 2.7 feet. So you have a lot less height to get the flow over, but you have a lot longer, wider area. And that 2.7 feet is basically the minimum across the width of the dam is the minimum area that's needed to pass that maximum flow. So now it's a matter of how do we configure that area. One option is to make it as deep as possible, which is what we did at that 500-year event over on the right side of the dam for option 1, to make it as deep as possible to minimize costs and minimize the amount of RCC. The other one is kind of what we think, it gives you a better level of flood protection, but it's just not quite as deep. And because it's not as deep, it allowed that crest to be set higher than that 1,000-year storm event. And we know it's more than that. The 500-year storm event, we know the 1,000-year is basically 4/10 higher than the 500-year. And this crest is about 2.7, 2.8 feet higher yet than the original 500-year crest. So we know you're getting a lot more storm protection this way. We just haven't quantified the numbers.
So actually, I have a question for you. It may sound foolish, but I just wanted to ask you this. So Tamarack was developed to help stop the flooding in the city of Meadville. So with the new construction of Tamarack, and we talk about the 500 and 1,000 year. Well, we've never got to the 500. The 1,000's probably, not saying that this can't ever happen, okay, but
Right.
realistically. So if you did get to the 500, doesn't the flow actually come out of Tamarack, and can't you control the amount of flow of water during a high rainstorm?
Yeah, and Heather, correct me if I'm wrong, but when they did the hydraulic and hydrologic study, they took into consideration the performance of Tamarack Dam. So it's considered that the same event is affecting the whole watershed, and Tamarack falls in that watershed. So yes, it does impact the hydrology, but it still has the same effect with the dam design that they're providing.
And if I recall, Tamarack doesn't overtop till past the 500-year storm event. So you're gonna theoretically still see the same amount of flow that would come out of Tamarack at the 500-year storm event as you would have before it was rehabilitated.
Everything that I thought
The
was,
benefit,
go ahead, Heather.
sorry. Well, the benefit of having Tamarack in place is that it does retain flows up there, and it slows the watershed above it, the rainfall from the watershed above Tamarack. It slows it down and allows the peak flows from the watershed below Tamarack and the rest of the uncontrolled drainage area that comes to Rainbow to pass through Rainbow actually before you even see that peak wave coming down from Tamarack.
Yes,
Now,
sir.
this will not be, the Rainbow Lake will not be drained for this project, or is that not correct?
Pardon?
Will Rainbow Lake be drained for this project?
No.
My gut is that Rainbow's going to need to be drained for the project, especially because of doing work on the principals, doing work on the pipe that goes through, and to be working down on that impact basin and everything down below.
Okay, now
My
dams,
gut is that it'll need to be drained, but I'm hoping I'm wrong on that one. I'd rather be wrong on the right way than the wrong way on that one.
dams tend to silt up after 100 years. So will you clean out the silt when you drain the dam?
We will not. The way this dam was designed, it was designed to have, it was originally designed to have 100-year sediment capacity storage when it was constructed in the early 70s. I'm sorry, in the 60s. When that was done, when we did our planning study a couple of years ago, we actually sent folks out in boats, and they dropped probes down to measure the depth of sediment down that the dam had actually accumulated. One of the requirements or one of the things that actually sets project life for us for these projects is the sediment capacity remaining. And it was shown at that point that it has at least 90, I'm pretty sure it has 100, but it has at least 90 years of sediment capacity behind it before anything would need to be done. So for that reason, we aren't planning on doing any kind of dredging because it has the needed sediment capacity behind it to make the project justifiable economically.
All right, thank you.
So what's the envisioned timeline to start construction, and like what are the factors that are like pressing that?
So we normally, working out from here, we normally have the design complete in about 2 years. Probably about 27 months from this point. And at that point, we send it in for permitting through DEP. Right now, we're being told to anticipate a year to 18 months for permitting. So that bumps us out three and a half years, somewhere in there, before we can even think about construction. So that's 2021, that gets us out to about 2024.
But
In an ideal world, in legislation, state legislation would be enacted that Meadville would have their money, we would have requested our money, and we'd potentially be moving into construction into 2025. My gut is it's going to be longer than that.
And we have been working, Senator Brooks is well aware of the process, and she actually brought it up in a meeting we had a few months ago. She, off the top of her head, she said, we remember Meadville, you know, we'll push that through. So in the appropriate time, we will ask her to do what she can to make sure that happens, to try to cover everything she can for the city, hopefully 100%. There are some costs that we might have from permitting, engineering, with Ashley's involvement, some easements that may be necessary. But you may recall in just this last capital borrowing, we set aside $100,000 for Rainbow Dam. That's what that was intended for, is to cover our costs, assuming that the state would cover the vast majority of what our share is.
The 35%.
Correct.
Of the 780 or
Of whatever it is.
whatever it is?
Of whatever it ended up being up to 8.6 million.
City can't afford this. No, I mean, if this was in West Mead, they would never be able to afford it. So, I mean, it just happens to be in the city.
And one of my concerns, we all know, things change with legislation and legislators. So we're looking at 4 years out, who's to say at that time, who's going to be our representative, and who would remember the discussion that took place when we took on the burden when they redid Tamarack.
We still will work to remind all of our legislators where we are and what we need.
Because we took on a big responsibility to make Tamarack happen. So I would hope that would be remembered.
So from
And we
here,
would work to remind Fish and Boat Commission as well. They're to help remind them, to remind other folks as well, to move this forward.
so Heather, our next meeting is in 2 weeks. Is 2 weeks or a month okay for you to have an answer back?
Yes. Yeah.
Both, either one?
Either one, I mean, we would ideally prefer 2 weeks.
Okay.
Ideally, we would prefer tomorrow, but we also understand that this is a lot of information, there's a lot of discussions that need to go on. And if we need to talk between now and then and go over anything or show you other information, we're happy to do that as well.
So it's not going to be tomorrow.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about it and see what we can do about getting it on in 2 weeks. If we need you to attend that as well, would you be available?
I will do my best to be available, yeah.
Okay.
Let me just quickly check personal. I think I should be okay for that, but yes.
We can work that out after the meeting, or the next week. We can work that out too. So.
Okay.
And Heather, and as part, basically it's a choice between alternate 1 or alternate 2, and then to complete the design, you'd need to know whether the exposed or topsoil covered RCC would be desired.
Correct. I would be coming back to you at some point to say, hey, do you want this to look like concrete, or do you want this to be more of a grassed, or whatever vision, what's your vision of what this would look like when it's completed? Yes.
What did alternate 3 look like?
Yeah.
So alternate 3 was a labyrinth weir, and let me see if I can pull that up without going too crazy on the screen
Still have an
share.
audit to get to, John. Got it done tonight. I don't know that we need alternate 3.
Hey, you don't have to get,
It's okay.
Heather, you don't have to get in details with
It's okay.
3 because I won't vote for 3. So,
Well, I can at least show you a picture of it maybe.
okay.
That'd be good.
So, but just, okay, it's like taking all of my mental capacity to like wrap my head around any of this. So we're moving forward, understanding that like we have to choose between probably one of these two,
Right.
though we'll have another option maybe. We're on the hook for 35% of the total project cost, but it's expected it's expected but nothing's guaranteed, that we won't have to pay for it. We have borrowed $100,000 and are anticipating that.
That's
So
correct.
that's like the lay of the land.
That's correct.
Okay, all right.
This is
But at
dramatically
this
more
point,
than
there won't be
original.
another alternative.
That's a lot.
These two alternatives.
Yeah.
And
We're
there's
not
no-
on the.
Nobody would ever, there's no municipality that can afford this anyway, so everybody knows that the city has to.
Investments in infrastructure.
So I apologize for not having it in color or have the aerial underneath, but this is what alternative 3 was originally going to look like. You keep most of your existing chute for the dam, and then, so you'd have most of the existing chute. Oh, now I figured out how to make the highlighter work. And then the labyrinth is like a zipper type structure. If you haven't seen them before, they're really cool, but basically it takes the entire width of the dam and compresses it down, actually wider than that, but it compresses it down into that zigzag pattern so you can still get the same amount of flow out and over top it, but just in a smaller area. And then there was going to be RCC down below to get that out over the rest of the embankment. So you can see how it looks different. It's also the challenge is because of Rainbow and the area, the state you're all on glacial till. Bedrock is very deep, and these structures need to be founded on bedrock. So all that was kind of jumping costs up over the $10 million mark.
Okay.
So that's why we didn't show you this option to try and confuse matters when we weren't in support of this one.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that all of the alternatives that would be developed between the two, beyond the two that we've seen, are both more costly and they involve the exposure of more concrete structure. So you'd see more mechanical looking stuff.
Yep.
Any other questions?
Yeah, just to remind you that a final decision on moving forward is pretty much 2 years out, 2 to 3 years out. Is that correct, Heather? Until design is done, there is no commitment on city funds.
Right.
Correct. And technically, the design can be done, and there's still no commitment. It's only when we would actually move into construction that we would sign any kind of agreement that would commit the city to funds for it. Because at that point, the agreement we sign, basically the city says, okay, NRCS, we're going to give you our 35% so you can go contract and build it. So it's only at that point that there's any kind of commitment on the city's part. And that agreement would only get signed, I would say, once you know for sure that the money would be coming. And honestly, we're not sitting on our 65% at this point. We're not planning on moving forward and asking for it from national headquarters until we're very comfortable and probably at least into permitting or know we almost have the permit and know that your funding is available because we don't want it sitting on the books that long.
And one last question for the engineers in the room. The Rainbow Dam is safe, right? and it will continue to be safe until
Yeah,
we figure out what's going on.
There are no imminent dangers with Rainbow Dam. We do perform an annual inspection in accordance with the dam safety requirements. We'll be doing that again in the next month or two. So,
Yeah, and I second what Ashley says. Everything we've found is very typical of dams across the state. The dam is aging gracefully. There are no imminent issues. And everything we think we found and all the problems that we think we have with this filter is we're pretty sure of, but we don't have confirmation yet. So, and even that's not an imminent issue. There's no reason to cause alarm or to say, go drain the pool behind it. We're just encouraging the city, as you have been in the past, to continue being proactive and bring the dam up to current standards.
Any other questions? Heather, thank you for,
Sorry, I'm sorry, I did so much. But even though we're not committing funds now, we'd be committing funds after the design phase. We are making a decision that commits us to a 2-year design process. Right, and if we were to change at that point, right, it would be another 2 years, right? So we're not committing the funds, but
We don't have to do this
should more or
at all.
less.
that's correct. After
This-
design.
we don't have to do
this
this
was
at all.
confirmed. After design is finalized, there is no, even though you're completing the design, there is no commitment being made now by the city that when that design is finalized, you'll proceed to construction.
Right.
It's not mandatory that you proceed to construction.
Right, but it's not like, it's like, there's not a very likely world in which we would go with the other design after a 2-year process of like we just wouldn't do it, or we would go through with what we decide in a month.
A
or
future
in 2
council
weeks.
stuck with our decision. That's it.
Good attitude, yeah, okay.
That's the truth.
any other comments?
So all of
Well, damn. Thanks, Heather, for being on the communication tonight. Sorry you weren't here.
Yeah, I apologize for not being there as well. Trust me, I've tried left, right, up, down, and kept setting. So,
All right, well, thank you again. I'm sure we'll be back in touch.
Thanks, Heather.
thank you, sounds good.
So you can
Have a great evening.
You too.
I'm waiting an hour to tell that.
Yes, I did. I wanted to say that so bad. Oh, damn. If you ever go down to Hoover Dam, you hear it a lot.
Yeah.
We're there, right? Mary Ann?
So Clint is here to present the 2020 audit.
Sorry.
No, it's like a marathon. Need a coffee break.
Had to have some It's a lot of money.
Now we got
All right. If everyone has an audit packet in front of you, this is going to be for December 31st, 2020, and we'll jump right into it. Page 1, 2, and 3 is your independent auditor's report. On page 1, it describes management's responsibility. And management's responsibility is for the preparation and fair presentation of the financial statements in accordance with accounting principles generally accepted in the U.S. of A. This includes design, implementation, maintenance of internal control relevant to the preparation and fair presentation of your financial statements. The bottom part there is the auditor's responsibility. Auditor is, I am here to express an opinion on your financial statements based on the audit performed. The paragraph below that describes the internal controls. I do review your internal controls. I don't profess an opinion on them, but I do disclose in this year's audit the only weakness that was noted was segregation of duties, with nothing unusual from prior years. And this year you actually are a single audit because of federal funding you received. When you're a single audit, there's a lot more schedules implemented in your audit. And there's different terminology that's involved. So you had over $750,000 federal awards. So that's what the bottom line there is describing, is that there is a single audit involved. And I'll probably be hitting a lot more of those schedules since they're new this year than more of the financial numbered schedules. So if you go to page 2, you do have a qualified opinion, as in prior years, relating to your fiduciary funds. The city elects to have the pension audited by the state in 2-year timeframes. And those audits aren't available for when I do the audit. So therefore, we just do a qualification just on your pension fund. So if you skip to the third paragraph on page 2, I do state, though, unmodified opinion was issued for all the other funds outside of the pension. So that paragraph states, in my opinion, the financial statements referred to above present fairly, in all material respects, the respective financial position of the governmental activities, business type activities, and aggregate discretely presented component units, each major fund other than the fiduciary funds. This is as of December 31st, 2020. There is also required to supplemental information. The next section of the audit is what's called management discussion and analysis. I won't go into detail. I'm actually going to skip that section. That's created internally. It's a good section to read, but I don't want to take up all your time in going through those pages. It provides a lot of detail of what occurred with the city in the prior years and the last fiscal year while encompassing it with your financial numbers. But we're going to go into the financial numbers after that, so there's no sense in going through both of them. So in the audit, if you would like to skip, we're going to go past the management discussion analysis, and we're going to go to the beginning of the government-wide financial statements. This is on page 17A. The government-wide financial statements are on a full accrual basis. On the top part, your current assets, you do have accounts receivable and notes receivable on the government-wide statements. In the middle of the page, your fixed assets are all reported. When we get to page 17B, you'll see that long-term debt's all presented on the balance sheet. The big difference between that and when we get to the next set of financials after this, the fund balances, is it's on the modified cash basis, so you're not going to see the fixed assets, you're not going to see the long-term debt, all that gets expensed. So on page 17A, the top part, your current assets, in the third column there, you can see your total current assets was $15,158,000, with a majority of that being made up of your cash and cash equivalents of $12.2 million. In the middle of the page, your non-current assets. The majority of this makes up your fixed assets that get depreciated over an estimated value of their lives. So your total current assets, the third column was at $47,789,000. You combine that with your total current, along with your deferred outflows, gives you a total assets of $65,790,000. Next page of 17B is your liabilities and your net position. I'll just summarize your current liabilities and your non-current liabilities, that top portion of the page. What makes up a majority of that is going to be your bonds payable or your notes payable, along with your pension and OPEB liabilities. I'm going to touch upon the footnotes, so I'm not going to go into detail here because you'll see how much it's broken down in the footnotes for you. In the restricted net position in the first column, you do have a portion that's set aside for debt service, along with a portion that's set aside for capital projects. Debt service was at $92,000. Your capital projects was at $2.6 million. Next page is your statement of activities. Top portion is on the far left side, starts with your expenses, broken down by your governmental activities. Work your way to the right, charges for services as income. As you work to your bottom right of that schedule is where the majority of your revenue is encompassed. That's going to be the taxes and other. Your intergovernmental has the state money that was received, along with the federal grant money. The federal grant money, again, is why this is a single audit this year, which is presented at $1,879,000. Third line from the bottom, your change in net position. For the governmental activities column, third line from the bottom is at $3,724,000. Your business type activities, I'll touch upon this more when we get to those separate schedules, but it did have a positive of $2,801,000. Big reason is because the DEP fund was transferred in 2020, so it's going to cause your proprietary fund columns to look a little different this year when compared to other years. Page 19, this starts your governmental fund statements. The first one is going to be your balance sheet. It's a big difference from the government-wide. You can see the top portion is your assets. The majority of your assets is made up of your cash and cash equivalents. All fixed assets for these statements are expensed. So if you go to the far right-hand column, your total assets for fund purposes at December 31st was at $12,117,000. Bottom section, your liabilities. Your total liabilities is at $1.7 million. This is in the far right-hand column. And your fund balances are presented in the 5 format there of non-spendable, restricted, committed, assigned, and unassigned, with your general fund in the first column all being unassigned at that $1.7 million. So you combine your total fund balance plus your liabilities, you get to that $12,117,000. Next few pages deal with reconciling. We have to reconcile your fund and your governmental wide, so I won't go into detail on those, but those are certain line items that are why the statements differ and how they reconcile together. So we'll go to page 21. 21 is your combined statement of revenue and expenditures. Top portion are your revenues. And on the revenues, that third line down, you can see your federal grant, the general fund having $505,000 coming in. Special revenue, which is your CDBG, having $270,000 coming in. And your capital projects, you had a large federal grant coming in of $1.1 million. The middle part of that page, your expenditures. The second column in, debt service fund. You can see where the principal's there of $2,660,000. That's one of the big differences between the statements. In the funds, the principal gets expensed, whereas in the government-wide, that gets applied against the loan. The fourth column under capital projects, in the middle of the page again, another big difference is that 2.449. That is expensed in your fund balance, fund statements, as opposed to being capitalized in the government-wide. So I highlight in the first column your general fund. General fund, third line from the bottom, did have a positive increase of $113,848. Next few pages again are reconciling between the statements, where we'll go to page 23A. This is your proprietary funds. Proprietary funds are reported on full accrual, so you are going to see your fixed assets. This is going to be your parking fund. Prior years, it was always your parking fund. This year, now your DEP building is now encompassed in the proprietary statements. So I won't go into great detail, other than your total current assets was at $2.6 million. Again, mostly made up of cash and cash equivalents. And net capital assets between your two funds was a little over $9 million, giving a total asset value of $11,794,000. Bottom part on page 23B, this is your liabilities in that position. Majority of your liabilities, again, that's going to be relating to your bonds and notes payable, which will be broken down in footnotes. And bottom portion is your net position, which is broken down between net investment and your capital assets between the two funds, along with your unrestricted. And your total net position between the two funds, that's 23B, bottom right-hand corner, is at $5,864,000, giving you a total net position and liabilities of $11,794,000. Page 24 is your statement of revenue and expenses. DEP fund, this is going to be the first time presented on this statement also. It's going to show a very large increase. You can see a third line from the bottom, change in net position of $3,029,000. That's because if you look a few lines above that, transfer out of their governments, that was to get the fund into the city through a transfer. So next year, it'll be a lot more reasonable change in that position occurring. Parking fund did have a decrease of $227,959, but in 2020, there was interruptions occurring with 2020, especially relating to the parking fund, to help contribute to that larger decrease in prior years. Then I'm going to highlight pages 26, 27, and 28 are all relating to your fiduciary funds. The only thing I'm going to highlight on there is page 27. The pension column, that is a column that's unaudited, but I wanted to highlight the third line from the bottom for your pension funds for the year. The net, we'll say net position of it occurred that you did have a $2.2 million increase relating to your pensions for the year. Next section is your footnotes. I'm only going to highlight a few of the footnotes in here. There's about 50 or 60 pages worth. So I'm guessing you don't want me to go through each one. I'm just going to highlight on page 31 your cash and cash equivalents. You do have an amount that you're in excess of, but the bank that you have it with does secure the monies through utilization of pooled assets to limit this risk that is in excess of FDIC. Note D would be the next footnote I'd highlight for you. This is relating to your accounts receivable. The first column there makes up a majority of it in your general column, and that relates to refuse receivable at 12/31. There's no allowance set aside for that because it's all 100% collectible, so that's $358,654 for your general fund. Next larger footnote is note G. It starts on page 38. This is each bond's value as of December 31st. They are in thousands. To where you can see on the bottom page 38, it was at $45,674. And then the next few pages after that breaks it down. The bottom page 39 shows where your bonds were at the beginning of the year, what borrowings occurred, refundings that occurred, and payments on all the bonds, to give you a balance at December 31st of $45,674. Page 40 gives different required disclosures. It shows in the middle of the page your expected principal payments over the next so many years till they're all paid off, along with the bottom of the page your interest requirements that will be paid over those respectable years. Next footnote is note M. It kind of coincides with note G. Because a lot of bonds some are bonds that are received are then in turn a note created for the authority that the bond is associated with. So this just describes those notes that are issued out to other authorities. And then the two last footnotes are note Q and R. Note Q is your pension plan. I'm just gonna highlight one item on relating to each plan. So the first one's the police, in the middle of the page for 45. You have a total pension liability that your actuary calculate out as $17,893,000. You have a net position available of $14,524,000, leaving a net pension liability of $3.3 million, and that's only on your government-wide financial statements. Then would take you to page 55. Page 55, this is the first page for the fireman pension. Again, in the middle of the page there, your total pension liability at the actuary calculate out was at $8.1 million. The net position available for payoff is at $7.2, leaving a net pension liability of $912,004 for the firemen. And the last one is on page 65. This is for non-uniform. Again, in the middle of the page there. Net pension liability is calculated by the actuary at $21,855,000. Plan fiduciary net position as $18,163,000, giving you a net pension liability of $3.7 million for non-uniform. For note R, this is going to be your OPEB or other post-employment benefits. On page 75, I'll just highlight the very middle there also. You have a net OPEB liability of $3.7 million. No net position set aside, so you have a liability of $3.7 million. That only shows up on your government-wide statements. Then would highlight the letters here at the end of the audit, pages 82. 82 is your internal control letter relating to government auditing standards. So this would always be in your audit in prior years. There was one weakness noted that we talked about, the segregation of duties relating in the fiscal department. and that will be highlighted in the schedule of finding and question costs that I'll go over here in a couple of minutes. The new letter is page 84 and 85. This relates to uniform guidance or your single audit portion of your audit. There is no weaknesses to be noted for uniform guidance purposes. Page 86 is your CFA. This relates to all your federal money that was received and expended. You've always gotten CDBG in the past, so that's your first three items there that's labeled small communities. New money that was received during the year is CARES money for COVID relief, and that was used and expended of $530,252. And during the year, there was money received from the Department of Transportation. This was amount of $1,078,525, giving you a total amount in that net cash received current period column of $1,879,528 of federal money received during the year. Page 88, if someone's looking at just your single portion of your audit, typically they would go to your schedule of findings and question costs because it kind of summarizes it all for them. So that's what 88 does. It provides, near the top there, you can see the one check box, one where there's an X by the S. That's telling them about there was a significant deficiency, which relates to segregation of duties. All the other ones are no, so that's telling them there's no weaknesses relating to your federal rewards, which is important for them to know that the money was handled appropriately with compliance items in place. In the bottom of that page, there was 2 programs that were identified as major programs, the Coronavirus Relief Fund and your Highway Planning and Construction. Page 89 does describe the segregation of duties. I'll just highlight the point F there. That the response was that management believes that due to the size of the city of Meadville, it would not be cost beneficial to hire additional accounting personnel at the time. And the bottom part there just says that there's none noted for federal awards. Last few pages of the audit just breaks down the non-major governmental funds, so I won't go into detail there, but it does provide each non-major funds, how they balance out for each one, along with their income and expense activity during the year. And that concludes the audit. Overall, the audit went well. The single audit threw some new items in there for you, and I think for you guys and a lot of other governmental entities with this COVID type money and CARES money going around, you're probably looking at a single audit for at least the next year or two. That would be my expectations for you.
Clint, how long have you been doing our audits? Time's gone fast.
Oh, wow. Probably maybe 10 years, probably. Yeah, probably around there. 8 to 10 years. I think 2 of those years you were single audits then. It's been a few years since you guys were a single audit.
Any questions for Clint?
I do, only because I understand audits as much as I understand
Sure.
dams, which is to say not very much.
What you
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Just help me, why are the pension funds unaudited? Are they audited separately? Is that the
I'll
video?
defer that to Tim if you.
The pension funds are audited by the state, and so they're done on a 2-year cycle, and so the current year will probably not be done for another year or 2. And that's why Clint does not have the most up-to-date one. Now, Clint does a computation?
A compilation.
A compilation?
I did do a compilation for each year.
For each year, which helps them, the state auditors. We had the option to go out and pay an auditor to do it, but I felt like, why would we pay for something when the state would come in and do it? And I really like it because they do a very thorough job, and we've always had pretty good success with them.
And you said they would be audited by the state, would that be next year? You said it's
I think, it will be at the end of 2022. And then depending on their timing, it could be a little while, it could be real quick, who knows, on their scheduling.
Thanks. this is an audit of 2020, so it would obviously not, the long-term debt that you're looking at is obviously does not consider the long-term debt that we just took on. That is
Right.
separate
Yep.
from this. Just under, net pension liability is just the difference between what we're expected to pay out in pensions, what we have set aside for pensions. That's the.
Yeah, through a lot of actuarial calculations, yeah.
Great.
Estimated guess, we'll say.
And then you said a couple times that certain things would show up in government-wide statements.
Right.
What does that mean?
So for governmental purposes, they have you present what's known as full accrual statements and then fund statements. Full accrual statements presents all potential liabilities, including OPEB and pension liabilities, which those just came into play about probably 3 or 4 years ago now. Before that, you wouldn't have had those on the books for government-wide purposes. So there's adjustments that are made because your books are on the fund statement purposes. There are adjustments made for governmental-wide purposes that adjust those to get to the full accrual government-wide statements. It's kind of in-depth, but there's reconciliations in there. I kind of breezed over those that reconcile the two statements together to help the reader see that they do balance each other.
Those are all the questions that I have to say.
Any other questions? Clint, thanks.
Thank you.
Been here 10 years. I won't be here next year with you, but you did a great job in the years I've worked with you on it. Deb Okowski, with the help of Tim,
Yep.
you did a great job on our finances. So Tim, thank you, and we'll certainly thank Deb for it. Good job. Thanks, Tom.
Mayor,
Yes.
typically you'd ask for a motion to just
Correct.
accept the audit.
Motion to
So
accept the
moved.
audit. Second,
Second.
roll call.
Donahue?
Aye.
McKnight?
Aye.
Roa?
Aye.
Vogel?
Aye.
Stearns?
Aye. Thanks again.
All right, thank you.
If you'd like to skip out, go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I want you on the beginning.
Mary Ann, you have anything else?
No, that's it.
Hey, to save some time. To save some time, council members' priority, we're gonna skip over it. Council members' subcommittee comments, anybody have anything you want to comment? Okay, so then we're gonna go into old business authorities, boards and commission.
Just a quick note to let council know that notices were sent out to those who serve on authority boards and commissions whose terms are ending at the end of this year, asking them to affirm whether they want to be reappointed or whether they are stepping down. They had 30 days to respond, so likely council will have a list to review probably the first meeting in December.
In December. Okay. Any questions for Katie? Okay, ordinances, we have the third and final reading. Katie? Go ahead, yeah.
An ordinance of the City of Meadville, Crawford County, Pennsylvania, to add a new article to Part 7, General Offenses Code of the City of Meadville, entitled Article 756, Possession of Small Amounts of Marijuana and Drug Paraphernalia, to establish a mechanism to process the minor nonviolent offenses of marijuana and personal possession of marijuana paraphernalia within the limits of the City of Meadville.
Motion, please.
Move to adopt. Second.
Discussion. Mary Ann?
There are no changes since last discussed.
Any questions from council?
Does this take effect as soon as we pass it?
30 days.
Or 10 days.
10.
Ordinance,
Or
10.
the 21.
It's 21 days.
21.
Under statute, it's 10 days.
10 days.
Okay, then do we need to amend this ordinance because it says it'll take effect on the 21st day?
That shouldn't be the case. It was, what was advertised said 10 days.
So should we amend the ordinance?
You can approve it subject to final approval by the solicitor on that day requirement, and we'll fix it. Because that's a non-substantive item for you, right? It's a legal item that we'll make sure we agree on between us, and we'll confirm it to you back. You can approve it as it is.
Any other questions? Roll call.
Donahue?
Aye.
McKnight?
Aye.
Roa?
Aye.
Vogel? Stearns?
Aye. First and second reading of repealing and replacing Article 713. Katie?
An ordinance of the City of Meadville, Pennsylvania, repealing and replacing Article 713 of the Municipal Code of the City of Meadville entitled Disorderly Conduct and Disturbing the Peace, and replacing it with a new Article 713 entitled Disorderly Conduct.
Motion for the first, please.
Motion.
Second.
I'll second.
Discussion. Mary Ann?
The only note here, no changes since last discussed at the previous meeting. We did confirm that the city cannot require the county to offer community service as a penalty for local ordinance violations.
Any other questions?
So that would mean just if, like, for any ordinance, any local ordinance, if we wanted to incorporate that, we would have to have some way of administering that, which is a huge,
Correct. Yes.
thanks.
Any other questions? Roll call.
Donahue?
Aye.
McKnight?
Aye.
Roa?
Aye.
Vogel?
Aye.
Stearns?
Aye. Second reading, motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Any further discussion?
No.
Roll call.
Donahue?
Aye.
McKnight?
Aye.
Roa?
Aye.
Vogel?
Aye.
Stearns?
Aye.
I think they were just here for the audit.
Yeah. Rainbow Dam, they were interested in.
Yeah. Ordinance first and second reading repealing and replacing Article 717.
An ordinance of the City of Meadville, Pennsylvania, repealing and replacing Article 717 of the Municipal Code of the City of Meadville entitled Disorderly Houses, and replacing it with a new Article 717 entitled Disorderly Houses.
Motion first, please.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Discussion, Mary Ann?
No changes since last reading.
Any questions for Mary Ann? Roll call.
Donahue?
Aye.
McKnight?
Aye.
Roa?
Aye.
Vogel?
Aye.
Stearns?
Aye. Motion for the second.
Motion.
Second.
Second.
No further discussion?
No, Your Honor.
Roll call.
Donahue?
Aye.
McKnight?
Aye.
Roa?
Aye.
Vogel?
Aye.
Stearns?
Aye. Discussion, draft ordinance amending Article 935 Park Avenue property. So, Mary Ann, I'll throw it to you.
Sure. So you have two ordinances in front of you. This was discussed at the last meeting. One is the exact same draft that you were shown last meeting. The other has the addition of actual times within the ordinance. Also in your council packets, I did provide a quote from Mobilecom concerning what it would cost through Mobilecom to install cameras in every park. Just looking at this point in direction on what council would like to do. I know there's been some discussion about questioning other vendors and other entities in the area who use security cameras at their facilities, and we can certainly look into that. Just wanting to see what direction council wanted to take on this, if any.
Any comments or questions for Mary Ann?
Personally, I would like to have us contact some other vendors and at least one other entity that does have a significant security presence to see what their experience would be. I agree with Jim.
Yeah, I personally would want to see some other options considered as well, so not just security cameras, right, but increased lighting, maybe some other kind of neighborhood-based solutions, like maybe we can look at what other communities have done, solicit input from folks I think would be helpful. The neighborhood watch that kind of encompasses parks, right, there might be some low-cost, right, alternatives that I'd want to maybe explore too. Okay.
Thank you.
I'm just curious, and it may have been there and I just don't remember. Did we have a report on, what created this issue to come to light? I mean, are we having a lot of vandalism? Are we having people hanging around? Are they smoking marijuana?
This revolves mostly around vandalism. The Public Works has noted when they do visits at parks every morning that there's been an uptick in particularly graffiti that they've seen. They've contacted the police, do police reports, but at this point in time, all they can do is just clean it up and move on.
So it's more for damages we're having, is
That's
that the
correct.
issue? Okay. I'm just wondering. Camera systems are nice, but they're pretty expensive. And then you gotta make sure that you have the ability for those cameras to be relayed to someone who's gonna watch them. And I don't think we're gonna be paying anybody to sit there and watch and monitor 24 hours, so it's gonna be on complaint driven or damage driven, that they would go in and start looking at the tapes, correct?
More than likely, yeah.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay. Under new business, discussion of policy relating to displaying of flags on city property. Mary Ann, I'll throw that one to you.
So this is a draft policy that Elizabeth had put together. Is prompted that the city does not currently have a flag policy. There's been some discussion at the Market House about flags. There's not, again, a uniform policy throughout the city pertaining to city-owned buildings. So the thought was that perhaps it was good for council to consider some sort of policy revolving around what flags may or may not be displayed and the process of displaying flags.
On the city building, so my question, because I had somebody contact me over this, so let's use the Market House as one of the examples. The city owns the Market House and the premise around the Market House. So we would only be enforcing the flags that are flown on the building and on our property. However, if somebody is leasing a vending area inside the Market House, I would assume that that's going to go under the lease agreement between the authority and that business. Is that correct? We're not going to be able to control that, right? That's not part of what we're talking about, or is it?
So what the market authority is considering any regulations they might have with their tenants, right? That's different.
All right.
But the city can still control what happens on their buildings and your property. So there's a little bit of an overlap there.
Okay.
Right? Because you do own that building, right? You own other buildings, you own other properties that you can control, right? And that control would filter down depending on how you implement it and what the city might do. Or you could leave it to the governing boards of, say, for example, the market authority, right? To control what happens between them and their tenants. This would be broader in that it would affect all city buildings, potentially. That's what you're discussing.
And flags, well, I would imagine would be the American flag on top, state flag in the center, and if so, the city flag would be underneath. So that's what the ordinance, is that what we're looking at?
Well,
Go ahead.
the way that I read it was that they would have to, the way that it's proposed is folks would have to come to council to request for a temporary period, whatever flag it would
Right.
be. And if it were flying with the American flag, that would have to be bigger
Yeah,
and higher.
so yes.
Okay, answer that question, okay, thank you.
But like not just those three, like those aren't, you're only three options.
Those are the ones that are more common to see in the city so far.
Don't you think that is going to complicate matters and cause potential problems? Because we'd be opening ourselves or future council up. If we decided that a flag was not appropriate and then another council decided it was, and then one after that said, no, we're gonna go back to how it had been. We're just inviting the ACLU and anyone else to come in and file suit.
I'd say maybe we are, Jim, but at the same time, like, I think that the policy gives grounds to, I don't know, right, like the policy puts it then in the hands of city council, who there's like there's like an outlet for folks to voice, right? And what, rather than, I think right now, I mean, there's nothing. And so the flags go up.
Correct.
And we take them down, it just happens behind closed doors, we either take them down or we leave them up, and it's, nothing about that is.
I guess what I'm suggesting is if we have a very basic policy, that there are 3 flags, United States, the state of Pennsylvania, Commonwealth actually, and the city of Meadville, and leave it at that. I mean, I'm seeing words in here that can be interpreted and reinterpreted and interpreted a 3rd and 4th and 5th time. So why would we do that to ourselves? Why don't we just have a very basic policy and say, those are the 3 flags? Because if you leave it to a council, okay, and I'll use an example. If someone wants to fly the pro-life flag, all right, depending on what council is in office, you might get 2 different results. Is that equitable? And I would argue that it is not equitable. So if you say we're not going to have any other flags except the 3 government flags, you don't have these issues.
I don't think I'm comfortable just limiting it to, I don't know, that. I guess I see your point, Jim, but at the same time, right, if it's coming to council, those folks are elected, right? And they can then at that point base their decision off of what they're hearing from people or past precedent. I mean, there's, I don't know.
They may be appointed. Maybe appointed.
Like one might be.
No, that happens since I've been here twice.
I think we just need to be careful what we put in, because there may be some flag that would irritate other individuals that would have a complaint that, well, you flew this flag and, you know, I want this type of a flag up. Of course, council can make that decision if it was brought to them. Thinking back on all my travels that I've gone, that's the normal flag representation, and 3 flags.
Right.
You know, Tampa, and other places I have visited, it's always been, of course, American flag on top, and then the state, and then the municipality or governing body at the bottom, so.
Yeah, I agree with Jim. I think, you know, just to prevent, because somebody's gonna be unhappy. You're gonna either fly a flag that somebody is offended by, or, you know, or the public. So I think sticking with just the 3 is fine enough. We don't need any unnecessary problems. You know, if the next council that comes in, if they change it, want to change it, I think that's something they should vote. But I think legally, I think we should stick with just the 3. That way there's no opportunity, because if you have someone from the LGBT or someone from, hopefully not, but someone from the Klan or some other negative, you know, if you're doing for one, you gotta do for others. So if it's just the 3 and that's it, there's no room.
I think back to being on council, how many phone calls I received about the Confederate flag being flown on someone's house, and why can't we remove it? And that's their right to put on their home what they want. You know, I've seen that many times, and I'm sure maybe you guys have received calls on it. I'm with you. I think keeping it simple. You know, if you own the property, you own the building, do whatever you want. But when it's a state government that your taxes pay for, I think that, in all fairness, that,
Represent everyone as everyone.
yeah, that's my personal feeling.
Yeah, a few final points that I will make. I love you, Larry. I think that equating LGBTQ folks and Klans folks, it's
Hate is hate. There's hatred in both toward both groups.
That's
I'm gonna back up and say
entering,
something.
that's entering a whole field, but I think that it's unfair to kind of equate to The other thing I'll point out, right, is that the policy was drafted by Elizabeth. Like, it was drafted by our solicitor as like a legal recommendation based on the is my understanding, based on like the situation at hand. So, I mean, I guess I would just say that I trust that that's gonna give us the legal protection rather than us kind of espousing what we think legal protections we need. One question I had about the policy, I didn't see it in here, but is it stipulated or is there an idea about like who can make these requests of the city, right? So like, is it public or tenants or, you know, like is just consideration?
Well, right, can I jump in just a little bit?
Yeah.
Right, so,
please.
I'm not sure this was a legal recommendation. It's a way to, at the request of staff and some of council, to bring it up for discussion if you want a policy, right, at a city level, right? You could choose not to have a policy. Currently, I'm not aware of a situation in the city other than one property where we actually have an issue of flags either being requested to go up or going. You know, we don't have flags on City Hall. We don't have flags at the Public Works Building, other buildings, right? So it's one city-owned property, right, which is the Market House, right, where flags have gone up. And they, I think as late as today, were discussing that, I believe, right, or they are planning on discussing, right, that, my understanding is those were tenant vendor, right, flags, right, which they could address through their leases. So you don't necessarily have to adopt a policy at the city level, right, because you're not doing it. Right now, no one is going to put a flag up on the poles up front, right, other than what you would have to permit that, right, Mary Ann, at your direction, right? So I don't think it's an active issue being presented to you. I think you have one situation, right? You have an authority there, you could leave it to them, or you could put in a policy, that's the decision you're making. Put a policy in to govern that, right? You could adopt a policy, as some of you have suggested, very narrow, right? And say it's gonna be, right, federal, state, Meadville flag. Or this would allow someone to request it, where it would be flown, it would give equal opportunity, someone could request it, they can fly it for 30 days, their group, right? It kind of establishes a uniform policy, so it's not just whoever asks, right? And that would apply to all city property. So it's just a decision, right? It's not this was brought up for discussion. This is one option for you, right? If that helps. But it's not we're not having the issue citywide of flags being flown and issues. It's really one situation that's come up.
Yeah, and so, thanks for that, Gary. And I think with that in mind, I would be interested in like requesting that the market authority review this policy and think about like how it would impact them. If the policy that they're adopting like nullifies, you know, like makes this useless, or if this would kind of take care of what they, you know, are having to deal with, and like if they could maybe send back, you know, kind of official.
Do we know what
This is our
happened? Did they consider a similar
They
policy?
did adopt a policy this morning.
Yeah. But
Can I-
like if they could look at this, right, and say like how it aligns with the policy they've adopted, or like, again, if like this isn't made necessary because.
I know
they
we
have-
had supplied a model to them as well for discussion purposes. I wasn't at that meeting today, so I'm not sure what exactly happened, but they've been discussing it as well.
Although if we adopt a policy on city-owned buildings, our policy
Would trump.
Trump.
Correct. Absolutely.
And that was my recommendation, to look at a policy on city property, including, you know, parks and stuff like that.
Yes.
So I will just also add that the opinion that this request was based on the use of the building and how the flags and where the placement of the flags are, how that's perceived by the general public, if that's perceived as a representation of the municipality rather than a representation of the vendor themselves. So with, for example, the Market House, with the flags being actually physically attached to the poles of the building, that could be possibly generally viewed by the public as a representation of the municipality's
As an
stance
endorsement.
on those flags.
Correct.
Whereas if the flags were placed at the doors of the vendor's space or within the vendor space, that would be representative to the public that this is the opinion of the vendor.
Right. That's why I thought it was important to put this policy in place.
Is anyone familiar with the policy that the authority adopted today? Like, would it address?
Their policy was more pertaining to the vendors, what the vendors could and could not place, that the market authority would have the ultimate approval of what displays that the vendors
Right.
could place.
I guess I'm just thinking about like where, right? Like if they say it can't, it's gotta be in your vendor space or something, that kind of stalls.
So I guess from council, do you want to go further on? I mean, it's a discussion now. Do you want to have an ordinance prepared or?
Do we need an ordinance or simply a policy?
A policy.
It's a policy.
I'd be in favor of a policy statement limiting it to the 3 flags.
Larry?
So would I. So would I.
Fun?
I'm in favor of a policy, but not limited to the 3 flags.
I'm in favor of the policy limiting the
Well,
flags.
just a minute. Now, did you say, I want to make sure I understand this, that if there is a policy, we could leave it to where on the outside, it's the 3, but what they want to put in the doorway or inside,
They lease.
it's what they lease. I'm in favor of that. I don't want to strip them of everything, but I don't feel that we're there to advertise or let other people advertise on the outside. That's where I'm at with it.
Okay, we can put that, something like that together for council's review.
Any other discussion? Okay, we are authorizing signature of an employment agreement for position for the city manager.
A resolution of the council of the city of Meadville authorizing signatures on an employee agreement for position of city manager between the city of Meadville and Mary Ann Manano. Resolved by the council of the city of Meadville that the attached agreement is hereby approved and adopted substantially in the form attached hereto, subject to final approval by the city solicitor, as and for a binding and effective agreement of the city of Meadville in accord with its terms. And the mayor, controller, and city clerk are hereby authorized and directed to execute and to attest such copies of the attached agreement in the manner required by law as may be reasonably required for the purposes of the parties thereto.
Motion, please.
Motion.
Second?
All second.
Discussion?
This is modeled after prior city manager agreements that the city has had with its prior 2 managers.
And we have been operating without an agreement, which we've never done. I mean, in the past, we've always had an agreement in place. We just kind of overlooked, and we need to have that in place. Any other comments?
Doing great.
Yes, I was going to say that.
Good job.
I guess I was your toughest critic in the beginning, and you won me. No, you've done a great job, and you deserve the position. Roll call.
Donahue?
Aye.
McKnight?
Aye.
Roa?
Aye.
Vogel?
Aye.
Stearns?
Aye. Congratulations, you're on board.
Thank you,
Keep doing the great work.
thank you.
Authorizing submission office, sorry, my eyes just went goofy. Office of the State and Fire Commission. Katie?
A resolution of the council of the city of Meadville authorizing submission of an application to the Pennsylvania Office of the State Fire Commissioners Fire Rescue and Emergency Medical Services Grant Program. Resolved by the council of the city of Meadville that whereas the Pennsylvania Office of the State Fire Commissioner has established an annual state grant program that provides funding for career fire companies and emergency medical services, and whereas the city desires to complete and submit an application for fire rescue and EMS grant program in the amount of $34,249.30 to purchase 10 portable radios and 3 thermal imaging cameras. Now therefore be it resolved by the City Council of the City of Meadville that the appropriate city staff are hereby authorized to submit an application to the Pennsylvania Office of the State Fire Commissioner Fire Rescue and EMS Grant Program in the amount of $34,249.30 and directed to take all action and to execute any and all appropriate documents associated with the grant application.
So moved.
Second?
Second?
Discussion, Mary Ann?
This is just an annual grant program available for both volunteer and career fire companies. Last year, the department received funding for both of these, for EMS and the regular fire This is just again, an annual application.
Is that why we have two resolutions, one for
That's correct.
volunteers and one for paid?
No, one is for EMS and the other one is for the fire department.
Okay,
They're two different funding sources. They're asking for two different sets of items for each grant.
Any other questions? Roll call.
Donahue?
Aye.
McKnight?
Aye.
Roa?
aye?
Vogel? Stearns?
All right, authorize submission, Office of the Fire Commission. Katie?
A resolution of the Council of the City of Meadville authorizing submission of an application to the Pennsylvania Office of the State Fire Commissioners Fire Rescue and Emergency Medical Services Grant Program. Resolved by the Council of the City of Meadville that whereas the Pennsylvania Office of the State Fire Commissioner has established an annual state grant program that provides funding for career fire companies and emergency medical services, and whereas the city desires to complete and submit an application for the Fire Rescue and EMS Grant Program in the amount of $9,300 to purchase 9 portable radios. Now therefore be it resolved by the City Council of the City of Meadville that the appropriate city staff are hereby authorized to submit an application to the Pennsylvania Office of the State Fire Commissioner Fire Rescue and EMS Grant Program in the amount of $9,300 and directed to take all action and to execute any and all appropriate documents associated with the grant application.
Motion, please.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Autumn, second. Same thing?
Same thing.
Any other questions?
No.
Roll call.
Donahue?
Aye.
McKnight?
Aye.
Roa?
Aye.
Vogel? Stearns?
Aye. Sean, I'll start with you tonight. And before we get, I want you to know, I went to a basketball tournament. So,
Basketball?
yes, I did. Fort LaBeouf, Meadville.
Oh, really?
Yes, they did a great job. So, go ahead, took it from you.
Well, I love the sports. Meadville plays prep on Friday. It's Cathedral Prep. And Meadville has a great team, but I don't know, against prep, we'll find out. So, and hopefully it won't rain, because if it rains, I probably won't be there. So,
Should be a good game.
should be good?
Yeah.
I think so
Yeah.
too. Our Browns are falling apart, but
Hey,
we're used to it.
yeah. Gluttons for punishment.
Yes, never give up.
Anything else?
No, that's it.
Yeah, lots coming up. Halloween, hope everyone has a good time. Love Halloween in Meadville. Looking forward to that. Election day, folks should get out and vote. November 2nd. The budget, the next day. Big stuff coming up. Yeah, and I guess just, in response, the presentation about the dam, I felt that in myself, it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money, and, I think that's why we need federal investment in our infrastructure, because Meadville is not alone in this. We know our budget season's gonna be a bleak one, and that's every year. And then on top of it, we've got these big improvements, to making our infrastructure that are, needed and only gonna get worse. So, I hope that it comes. Folks should do what they can to make that a reality.
Thank you. Larry?
Yeah, just, thank you, congratulations. And we'll miss Elizabeth. But I just want to say again, I keep an eye on the numbers, being that I drive, I'm in the public a lot, and they're going up. People are still getting sick, still dying, so make sure you wear your mask. And now it's starting to be dark when our kids are going to school, and a lot of times when they're getting dropped off. So please be careful. I don't know how many people I've had run red lights, just in a big hurry to get around that big yellow bus. Leave a few minutes early because we're out there every morning. I don't want to see anybody get killed on my route or any other driver's route. So please be careful. You got college students that are walking now. Like I say, it's dark a lot more in the morning, so everyone be careful. And yeah, I'm going to be out taking my granddaughter trick or treat. That's my excuse for getting my candy. So I will be out.
Come up to the house.
Yeah. So, yes, sir.
Jim?
It's been a long meeting, so I won't contribute to it, except to congratulate Mary Ann Eat lots of candy, go trick or treating, enjoy the Halloween parade, and we'll see you in November.
First of all, congratulations, Mary Ann. It's been, the last few months has been a big learning experience for all of us, and you've done a phenomenal job. I want you to know that. And appreciate your hours, because you know, people don't realize you still have a private life with 2 children, so always take time with them, that's important. Halloween, everybody said it, it's from 6 until 7:30 on the 28th, Thursday. Please make sure that your children are aware of the street traffic, and I believe our officers will probably be out along with our fire department. So everyone, drive very, very carefully. Kids get excited sometimes and they run down the steps and they're not thinking where they're heading to. So if you're on a street in the city of Meadville, slow down, especially on Baldwin Street. It's not a racetrack. With that, I think we're going to adjourn to an executive session on.
Personnel and potential litigation.
Okay. And I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. And I will ask for an adjournment to an executive session.
So moved.
Second?
Second?
Roll call?
Donahue,
Aye.
McKnight,
Aye.
Roa,
Aye.
Vogel, and Stearns.
Aye. And write down, I got both of your names correct tonight, and I didn't even screw up once.